Hello everyone, it's Shannon here for Hero Arts. In today's video, we are going to create this very bold and vibrant fall card featuring the September 2022 My Monthly Hero Kit. We're going to start out by simply stamping this beautiful bouquet. I have a piece of the Deluxe Smooth white cardstock here, and I'm going to stamp my image in Intens-ified black ink. I am using my Misty to stamp this because I do want to stamp my image a second time after I've Copic colored it, so I'm going to leave that stamp in my Misty. So now I've allowed the ink to completely dry and I'm ready to Copic color. I'm going to start with these kind of feathery palm things here. I'm starting with a very light tan, which is E30, and quickly coloring them a base layer for them. Then I'm moving on to E31 and kind of coloring a gradation. And though this image is pretty intricate overall, all the flowers and leaves are very small, so you won't really have to go back much and kind of color out or smooth out the gradations. I've now moved on to the Pom Pom Flowers. I used Y21 as a light yellow, then I moved on to YR23 to add a little shadow to make them appear more round. Now moving on to these daisy-like flowers, starting with R85, a really kind of beautiful maroon color, coloring all the petals with this color. I do miss some flowers here and there, and I will realize that later as I work my way through coloring this whole bouquet. I've now moved on to my dark for this maroon color, which is R39, and just coloring the center or where the petals meet the center of the flower. Now moving on to these somewhat carnation, maybe peony-like flowers, starting with a orange, which is YR02. Now I'm moving on to a darker shade, which is YR07. So a darker orange, coloring kind of where the petal meets the center of the flower. And then I'm moving on to a third, even darker shade, which is R05. Most of my flowers I only use 2 colors, but for some of the larger ones I do move up to 3 markers. Now moving on to the poppies, starting with that R05 again, the same color we finished with the orange flowers. This will be the base, and then we're going to move on to E08, so kind of like a terracotta color, coloring this where the petals meet the center of the flower, and then we're going to finish here with R59. Now these flowers are a little bit bigger, so I am going back through my colors. That was E08, now finishing up with R05, just to kind of blend out that gradation. I'm now going to move on to these dried lotus pods. Quickly colored the tops of them with E31, which is a light tan or light brown. Now I'm carefully coloring around the openings in the tops of these lotus pods with E57, so a darker kind of brown. Also coloring the stem a little bit as well. Then I'll move on to this even darker brown, which is E29, and color kind of a little bit of the stem and a little bit of the sides, and adding a little shadow to all of those little openings in the top of the lotus pod. Now we'll just add a little bit of shadow and add some depth. I repeated that process for the second pod. And now we're going to move on to the centers of the poppies, which I realized that I had forgotten to color. Starting with C5, a gray, and just coloring not the very center, but that outer ring on the center. And then I moved on to an even darker gray, which is C7, and just coloring the very center edge of that outer ring. Now we're going to move on to the very center, and I'm just going to quickly color that with a light green, which is YG03. I realized I missed this poppy here, so I'm quickly coloring it with my kind of red-orange combo, or my rust combo, which is R05, E08, and R59. Once I finish that, we'll move on to coloring the centers of those maroon flowers, which I also forgot. Just grabbed that golden kind of yellow, which was YR23, and quickly colored the centers. Now moving on to kind of the greenery, starting with these like poppy buds. I am using G21 for these, quickly coloring all of the poppy buds as well as some of the leaves. I kind of have 2 green combos, and this is my kind of more sagey green combo. So once we finish with the G21, I'm now going to use BG93, so it's kind of my medium shade. Color the bottom of the poppy buds and where the stem meets, or where the leaves meet the stems. After I finish that, I move on to my darkest shade, which is BG96. And again, coloring where at the bottom portion of the buds and where the leaf meets the stem. Once I finish with that color, I'm going to actually go back through my my medium and my light shade, so BG93, and then finishing with G21, just to kind of blend out those leaves. I'm now moving on to my new green combo. This is more on the olivey, limey spectrum, starting with YG03 and quickly coloring basically all the remaining greenery. So all the remaining leaves and stems I'm coloring with this lime green color. So once I finish adding this kind of base color, we'll move on to the medium shade, which is YG93, coloring where the leaf meets the stem, like about 2/3 up the leaf. Now I'm finishing with my darkest shade, which is YG67, coloring that last third where the leaf meets the stem. And once I finish with this darkest shade, I'm going to go back to my medium shade, which was YG93, and quickly blend out the transition, which you see me doing here. And once I finish with that, I am going to move on to a really dark green, which is G99, and color the very center, the very middle part of the bouquet with that dark green, just to add some shadow, because you wouldn't really see a lot of white space in there, so just kind of filling in the space with that dark green. Then I quickly colored any flowers I missed. Now we're moving on to the vase here, starting with N1. This is my lightest shade, and I'm coloring along the sides as well as all of the indentations in this vase, and even adding a shadow where the flowers kind of overlap the lip of the vase. Once I finish with this lighter shade, I'm going to move on to N3 and again kind of color those same areas, the side of the vase, any of those indentations in that main the top part of the vase, and even color the shadow under the flowers and leaves where they kind of sit over the lip of the vase. When I finish with that, I'll just kind of blend it out with my lighter gray, which was N1, and when we finish that, we're actually done with all of our coloring. So remember when I said I wanted to stamp this again? So that's what I'm doing now. I'm popping this image back into my MISTI. I hadn't moved my stamp, so it's perfectly lined up, and I'll just ink it up and stamp it a second time. And what that does is really darken those lines, which sometimes get a little softened when you Copic color, and I went ahead and die cut it out with the matching die. And now we're going to move on to the background. So I have the cling stamp here. I've already pulled out my mouse pad. I'm going to place the cling background stamp in my MISTI, pick it up, and then I'm going to grab this sticky kind of platform or sticky pad, put it in my MISTI, and that will just hold my A2 panel of pumpkin paper in place while I stamp it. Now I'm kind of lining it up and making sure that the cling background stamp completely covers the panel, and now that I know I got it right, I'm going to ink it up in pumpkin ink and stamp over this panel. So it's pumpkin on pumpkin. I think perfect for a fall card. Now we're going to move on to our sentiment. I'm going to use the Sending Gratitude stamp or sentiment from the stamp set, ink it up in embossing watermark ink, stamp it onto some pitch black cardstock, and then I will dip it into some white embossing powder and then heat set with my heat tool. Then I went ahead and cut it down to a strip off camera, and we're basically ready to put this card together. I do have a panel of vellum that I trimmed off camera as well, and that's going to really help really draw your eye in and tone down the background a little bit. So I first quickly adhered the pumpkin panel to an A2 top folding white card base. Now I'm adding foam adhesive to the back side of my bouquet, and I will stick it down onto that vellum panel. That vellum panel is 3 1/4 by 4 1/2. Then I've added a strip of black cardstock to the back side of my sentiment to add a little bit of dimension. And then I cut another strip down to just basically like 2 1/2-inch strips and added them to the very edges. This is going to support it a little bit because this is going to go over the bouquet, which is 1 layer thickness of cardstock. And then I added some foam adhesive to the very ends of the strip, a little bit of liquid glue to the center of the strip, and now I'm going to adhere it down to my bouquet, which is obviously already adhered to my vellum. Now last step, all we have to do is adhere our vellum panel to our card front. Just want to make sure I add the liquid glue behind the bouquet and behind the sentiment strip, so you can't see the glue on the backside of the vellum. It's hidden by those die cuts in that sentiment strip. And then I just stuck it down to my card front. And here's the finished card. I'll hold it to the camera so you can get a good look at all that Copic coloring and that beautiful background. I really love how this card turned out. I think it's a really pretty fall card with some beautiful, rich, deep colors. I hope you guys enjoyed today's card and video. If any questions about the products I use, please check out the links below in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.